And yet at this time, and the explanation is that there was no man there to cultivate the land, no man to work the ground. And then verse 6 tells us that there was a mist, and literally the term there is better interpreted, there was a spring going up from the earth. It's believed that the earth was being watered, and no doubt there was a degree of the earth being watered by mist at this point, but the term in the Hebrew there better signifies a subterranean spring that was watering the Garden of Eden there as the river flowed through it. When we come to verse 7 of this second chapter, we see something that is truly, truly profound. It is profound in that verse 7 says, "Then the Lord God formed the man of the dust from the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living soul," or a living creature, if you will. This is profound in that it describes man in both low and high terms all at the same time, does it not? On the one hand, man is described as being created or formed from the dust of the ground. That's about as low as you can get. That's about as insignificant as you can get. That's an image of lowliness and humility. On the other hand, this passage tells us that man has been breathed into by God. He has been breathed into by God. And as we're going to see, this breathing into man by God constitutes an image of glory. So we see it is man's unique role. As we begin to look at this second chapter, it is man's unique role to be the only creature in all of God's creation to be made of both dust and glory. He's made of dust. He's made of glory. A combination, if you will, of the earthly and the heavenly. Dust and glory. We'll flesh this passage out under three headings. We will see first of all the formation of man. And God formed man from the dust of the ground. We will see the animation of man. God breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. And then ultimately we will see the glorification of man as he became a living soul, radically distinct from anything that had been created to this point in God's wonderful creation. Let's look first of all at the formation of man. The formation of man. Then the Lord God formed the man from the dust of the ground. And this is very interesting because immediately in this passage we see a word that we have not seen up to this point in the Genesis narrative. This word formed in the Hebrew, yastar, is a new word. When we go back into chapter 1 and we look at the words that is used for God's creative work, it is the Hebrew bara, which means to create, literally, as we saw, from nothing. The term make is used, but this term formed is a new term that is not used of anything else in creation up to this point. It means literally to form, as the English translation clearly demonstrates. It means literally to form or to fashion or to frame. And I think most of all of us would understand that, but there is also an element of our understanding of this word that I think is missed. In the Hebrew, there is this element of this word that means to predetermine or to destine or preordain that which is being done, that which is being formed. You see, God is not working off the cuff here. And the writer of Hebrews chooses a very specific term to call our attention to that very point. God is doing something different from the rest of creation. This term, and this is interesting. This term is actually also used in Genesis chapter 6, verse 5, in the days of Noah, when God looked down upon men and saw that the thoughts and the intentions of man's heart were only evil continually. The word for intentions there in the Hebrew is the same word as formed in Genesis chapter 2, verse 7. The idea being communicated is that this is a forming, a framing that is predetermined by God. It is the divine intentionality to create something different and something that stands apart from the rest of creation. It literally conveys the idea, Don, of a potter that is sitting with exquisite attention over the potter's wheel as that lump of clay spins, and he has a vessel in mind. He has a piece of pottery in mind that he is determined to make, and he's already determined it, and he's very intentionally going about shaping and framing that piece of pottery from that lump of clay. It has a particular shape. He's executing a perfectly originated design. So we see from this that God's creation of man was by very careful design. Man was no afterthought, but rather man was the product of the infinite mind that designed the atom and that designed the entire cosmos. Infinite attention was focused on the creation of man. And that is why the psalmist would say, and Dan referred to this in his prayer this morning, the psalmist would say, I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Literally, in the Hebrew, I am fearfully and wonderfully formed. The idea that is communicated here in Genesis chapter 2, verse 7. Wonderful are your works, and my soul knows it very well. This idea of forming and framing is actually a metaphor that is used for the creation of every human being. Job chapter 10, verse 8, Job says, your hands fashioned and made me. They formed me and made me. The psalmist says in 119:73, your hands have made and fashioned me, and give me understanding that I might learn thy commandments. So we see that man was created according to the preordained design of God, and that he was created as an intentional production of the infinite mind of God, and that because of that, we are fearfully and wonderfully made. We notice next in our progression through this text that we are made, that God formed man, if you will, from the dust of the ground. The Lord formed the man from the dust of the ground. Very interesting play on words here. The Hebrew word for ground is Adamah. The Hebrew word for man is Adam, from which we derive Adam. Do you see the connection that the writer of this passage is making there? There's a relationship between man and the ground, if you will. It shows our close connection here that God took dust of the ground, Adamah, and created Adam or Adam, man. There's a very close connection here. And when you stop and think about it, that's quite evident. If we're created from the ground, it's our cradle,